What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. We've got a special edition for you today. I got a chance to sit down with one of my favorite baseball writers, one of the guys that I think is the best in the business, Andy McCullough, who is the senior baseball writer for The Athletic, also used to be a Dodger beat writer for the LA Times, and just got about 20 minutes to chat with him about the Dodgers and the World Series and how they stack up against the Rays. So enjoy this interview with Andy McCullough from The Athletic.
All right. Well, I welcome in Andy McCullough, who joins us now. He covered the Dodgers for the LA Times from 2016 to 2018 before moving over to The Athletic, where he's a senior writer. And I'll add a man with fantastic music taste. Very few places you can go for pop punk music thoughts as well as airtight baseball analysis. So, Andy, I appreciate you joining us. I imagine it's a busy in-between day with Game 7 last night, the World Series tomorrow. And so I guess I'll start with something I'm fascinated by is, what's it been like to cover baseball and the playoffs in particular these last couple of weeks?
I mean, it sucks. It's brutal, you know? I mean, look, it's not brutal. There are way worse fates than mine. But, you know, I'm not traveling this postseason, so this will be the first time I'm not at the World Series since 2014, I guess. So I've been to 6 in a row, and most of the time as a beat writer, but a couple as like a national guy. And it's like covering the playoffs is my favorite part of this job. You know, like I really love being at those games and getting to write about them and the tension and, and all that sort of stuff. And, but like seeing all my friends in the business and, just all that sort of stuff. And so, it's not fun, like covering these games from, the couch is like, there's just limited utility to it. The teams have done a pretty good job of getting players on Zoom calls and stuff like that, but it's just not the same, it's just not the same. You can't really produce the sort of stories that, you could otherwise in person. So I'm hopeful that, by like 2025, it'll be back to normal.
Yeah, hopefully by then, right?
Yeah.
Well, thinking specifically about the Dodgers, you're sort of in a unique position as somebody who covered the team in the 2017 and 2018 seasons. I'm curious, as you watch this group, obviously not on the day-to-day beat, even though that's sort of a weird thing to be doing anyways in this season, but is there anything specifically about this group that's maybe different or unique from those two teams that would lead you or that you could pass along to fans as sort of a hopeful reason to believe that things might be different this year?
So in right field, most days Mookie Betts will be playing, and that's going to help, I think. I mean, I don't know if this team is better than the 2017 team. I think even in the moment, being there every day with the 2017 team, and I covered the Royals, in 2014 and 15, who went to the World Series, and I thought the 2015 Royals, who are kind of going to be like degraded by history, I think that was actually a really great team, but the 2017 Dodgers were incredible. I mean, they were just like, a storm basically every day. And there's no way to know, how things might have been different, but like they lost to a team in 7 games who was cheating, in a way that I think kind of stunned the industry with the depths of it. So like, I think, to say that this group is better than 2017, that's a pretty significant ask.
Yeah.
The 2017 team was really, really good. But what these guys have is they have Mookie Betts. They have Corey Seager playing at an elite level, which he really wasn't in 17. He was banged up. His elbow was giving him some issues, and he wasn't hitting the way he is now. They have, really, like, their offense has kind of been a little scattershot, but I think, they have superstars, and when those guys play like superstars, when Mookie Betts saves a home run every night, and when Cody Bellinger is able to get his swing off, even though he's kind of feeling not right at the plate, and when Corey Seager hits 2 or 3 big hits every night, like that's what wins in the postseason, and that's the thing that eluded them in recent years is their best players did not perform. And so I think that would be the difference. There's still some concerns about the pitching. I think, going into this matchup, their pitching's a little short right now, but I mean, look, like they're playing a team that is really, really good. I think, it's going to be a really competitive series, but like the Dodgers have more star power, and if their stars play well, they should win.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Mookie. Have you seen anything in all of your years watching or covering baseball like the defense that you saw in the outfield, not only from Mookie Betts? I mean, it's almost easy to forget the 2 home runs that Cody Bellinger robbed this postseason as well. So between the 2 of them and Justin Turner's play at third base, I mean, those are 5 or 6 of probably the best defensive plays I've ever seen, and they all happened in the playoffs at one time.
Yeah, I mean, I did cover Lorenzo Cain.
Fair.
So he is a similar sort of game-changing defender, especially that 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like their defense is really, really good, and that's something that hadn't always been a strength. It's gotten better, I think, as the years have gone on, as they've gotten a little bit younger. Having Bellinger in center field is just like a huge asset, and then Betts, yeah, I mean, like. Those are 2, extra base hits. Like one's definitely a homer, one's an extra base hit that he takes away. And that just changes the game when you can steal those from, the opposing team, because, your pitchers are not going to miss their spots to that extent that, is going to produce that outcome all that often. And so when you can steal that away, that's huge. So it's a big strength. It's a big strength. Of course, they're going to be playing a team who's just as good at catching the baseball. So it's why it should be a fun matchup.
Yeah, well, switching to a couple of storylines that always seem to circle the Dodgers around this time of year, Dave Roberts and Clayton Kershaw. And I'll start with Roberts. His managerial decision-making always seems to be under the microscope. Honestly, I thought he called the perfect Game 7, just about perfect. Maybe 1 or 2 things that would be different, but out of 15 decisions, pretty well. You spent some time around Roberts, obviously around the team for a few years, the clubhouse that he was in charge of. I'm curious if you could share, what are ways that he impacts this team that maybe fans can't appreciate? Fans only see the decisions he makes and sort of specifically the ones he makes in the postseason. What is it about him as a manager that sets him apart, in your opinion?
Well, I think being the manager for like the modern sort of forward thinking baseball team is a lot different than the way it was even 10 years ago. I mean, so much of what he has to do is help his players buy into the concept of what they're trying to do. And that's basically when you have a team like the Dodgers, where you have, if it's a 28-man roster, you have 28 big leaguers on there. There's no dead spots on this roster. There's no jabronis on the roster, right? Like, and that's one of the things that makes them great. It's another thing the Rays do. But when you have 28 big leaguers, that means you have 28 guys who think they should be, playing every day. 28 guys who think they should be pitching in leverage. 28 guys who, are relievers who think they should be starters. And you have to get those guys all buying in and moving in the same direction and understanding that they have to, give up, part of their stats, part of their production in pursuit of the whole. And so, like, it's not a coincidence that, and this isn't Dave Roberts who did this, right? Yeah. Kike Hernandez came off the bench and hit the home run. But there are very few teams who have that sort of, talent, and also guys who are locked in and bought in enough to be ready for opportunities like that, to put together an incredible at bat like, Kike Hernandez did there. And like, I don't think there is, I think there's a correlation, a causation. I don't know. It's related, the way that he's managed this team over the past 5 years. I mean, remember, like Don Mattingly is a good manager. I think people can agree that he's a good manager. But the club was like best known in those years for being dysfunctional, for how much everyone, hated each other, how much they, whined to each other and or whined about each other. And, Roberts was the manager with Yasiel Puig on the team for several years and did a really, really good job of handling, a player who caused a lot of issues with his teammates.
Yeah.
He did a really good job of getting Puig to buy in. He did, a really good job of getting Clayton Kershaw to be a little just more flexible with, his usage and, the shifting behind him. And so, I just think the job of manager is a lot more than, which relievers you send into games. Now, that said, at this time of year, I always looked at it as like, it's like a standardized test, right? And like in October, that's the tactical portion of the exam. You have to be able to run a bullpen. You have to be able to, understand leverage. You have to be able to press the right buttons. And that's something that Roberts did really, really well in 2016 and 2017. And his sort of reputation really started to take a hit in the 2017 World Series. And, it's like, oh, he was using these guys too much. Oh, he didn't punt game 3 after Darvish, blew up. Like he used Maeda too much. So Maeda was tired the next day. Well, if you look at it now, was Kenta Maeda, tired in game 5 from his overusage, or did Jose Altuve know what's coming?
Yeah, good point.
And so there's just so much that like I feel like, and look, like I was very critical of the way that Roberts managed game 5 of the NLDS last year. I wrote a couple columns kind of like frankly just like crushing him and the organization for both their execution and the philosophy that went into that game. And so like I'm not to say that the man is infallible. Like he has made mistakes in high profile situations, but I think like the idea that he doesn't know what he's doing in these spots, it started when the other team knew what was coming.
Yeah.
Like, of course you're going to look like a dummy when the team knows what's coming. You're going to be blamed for overusing Brandon Morrow if George Springer knows it's going to be a fastball.
Right.
So I agree with what you said. I think he managed really well in game 7. I think the decision to stick with Urias for the final 3 innings showed, just really good feel. And I think it's also a good job by the organization of taking May, Gonsolin, and Urias and understanding who was the right guy for the last 3 innings.
Yeah.
Like if Urias starts that game, they do not win. Is how I would put it. But him closing, I think they win. So it's a long answer.
No, it's great.
It's complicated, because I think Roberts has gotten a lot of criticism over the last 4 years, a lot of criticism, and some of it, I believe is deserved. But I think a good portion of it has been unfair, and the reputation began in, as we know now, facing a team who was cheating.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating to think about. Like if that year is sort of stricken from Dave Roberts' record, how does it play out? But one of the things you referenced, which is last year, and I think the decision that a lot of people, and the person who's also sort of connected to this is Clayton Kershaw. And obviously the relief decision that was made with Kershaw is probably kind of exhibit A when people want to make arguments. As somebody who's covered a lot of baseball, I'm curious your thoughts on Kershaw. When it comes to the playoffs, do you think the narrative around Clayton Kershaw is fair?
Yeah. I mean, I think it just depends on what that narrative is. Like, is the narrative that he doesn't perform well in the postseason? Then, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Like, is the narrative that he's a choker? Is the narrative that, he shrivels up in the moment? I don't place sort of character judgments on it.
Yeah.
Like, but does he pitch as well in the postseason he does in the regular season? No, I don't really know a way around that, I guess. Like his ERA is like a 4.5 in the postseason. He's thrown about 180 innings at this point, and his ERA in the regular season is like 2.25 or something. I mean, and like Justin Verlander's had a lot of blowups in the postseason. His ERA is not that high. Max Scherzer has had a lot of blowups. His ERA is not that high. Now, like you can get into the details of like why the numbers are what they are. You can get into the, he pushed, like even the other night, he faced at least one batter too many and probably started an inning too many. And that goes back, all the way to 2013. Yeah. Where he was pushed too hard. He was asked to go on short rest too much, and even when he wasn't going on short rest, coming back on regular rest from short rest hasn't, the way he was used in 2016 when, you know, he had a major back issue with the herniated disc and, you know, all that sort of stuff. But like, I think to call, like, I get that, like, it has to be called a narrative, you know, but that, like, suggests that it's not real. Like, it is what it is. He doesn't run from it, you know, like his numbers in the postseason are what they are.
Yeah.
I don't think it really affects him all that much. It certainly doesn't affect his preparation or how much he's trying, but for whatever reason, whether it's his usage, whether it's the quality of competition, whether it's, you know, bad luck, all those sorts of things. But no, he doesn't perform as well in the postseason he does in the regular season. But
yeah.
Well, I mean,
it's like you said, when you get into luck and, you know, stranded runners and inherited runners and that kind of thing, it's like, you know, that's when you just get into this world of speculation that, you know, sure, could you argue that he's gotten unlucky? Yeah, but I mean, what does that even mean? You know, like Urias last night, for example, when he was pitching to Freeman, I was like, he made a few mistakes with fastballs right over the middle that Freeman didn't hit. So you got to kind of go both ways. You can't say Urias was amazing last night, but Kershaw has been better than the numbers, because I think it sort of shifts both ways. But
yeah, I think you're right, and even, like, I think outside of maybe the 2017 World Series Game 1, I think the best postseason game I ever saw him pitch was the 2016 NLDS Game 4, which he pitched on short rest. He went like 6 2/3, and I think he was charged for like 5 runs, you know, but it was because he left with the bases loaded. He got, you know, there was like kind of a play that should have been made behind him. He left with the bases loaded. He got, you know, kind of squeezed on like a 2-2 or a 3-2 to Bryce Harper. And then Pedro Baez did, you know, Pedro Baez things, and, you know, they tied the game. But like that, to me, you know, pitching on short rest with his back as fucked up as it was, like, that was incredible. You think he struck out like 10 or 11, but no one ever talks about that start being good or bad. It just is what it is in the numbers. I mean, he threw 6 2/3 and gave up, you know, 5. Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, along the lines of the pitching staff, we know Kershaw in Game 1. We know Buehler in Game 3. You presume 5 and 7 involve those guys as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to ask what you think Dave Roberts will do. I'm curious, from your perspective, if you were in charge, how would you handle the pitching staff as far as Dustin May, Julio Urias, and Tony Gonsolin?
I mean, I think a lot of it's going to depend on who you need to use in Game 1, because I think you're going to need cover for Kershaw in case his back, you know, flares up again, or if he doesn't have it, which I think is possible. So you're going to need, you know, Gonsolin, May, and Urias all on the ready for Game 1. And then I think you kind of distribute those guys. You know, I haven't really, like, bore down on how Tampa Bay matches up. They are more platoon heavy than the Braves are. The Braves were a bit of a push button lineup, so it was a little bit easier to diagram out. But I think, I mean, it's 2 of those 3 guys are gonna handle the bulk of Game 2. And I think it just depends maybe on which of those 3 doesn't appear in Game 1, if any of them do. I mean, they're going to have the full complement of the bullpen. You know, you might get a bunch of Joe Kelly or something in Game 1, but
don't tell us that.
It's tough because, like, Urias is good enough to be a, you know, 4 or 5 inning starter, and he should be closing. Like, you know, you wish there were 2 of them. He's just, you know, so they're kind of in a weird spot. I'm not exactly sure how they feel like, you know, I think they're still trying to decide. I mean, they're in meetings right now trying to figure it out. And I think you got to bear down on, like, you know, there's so many questions. It's like, okay, so, you know, which of their righties has reverse splits, you know, who can, you know, cause like I looked this up at the beginning of the year. I think the Rays really don't hit right-handed pitching. Like, almost all of their, it's not that they don't hit, but like they really succeeded against lefties, you know, like Brandon Lau, you know, Joey Wendell, like all of their guys, basically all the guys besides Randy were more, did more of their damage against lefties. So maybe you go with more Gonsolin and May, but, you know, who knows? I don't know. I think they're still sorting it out now.
Yeah, I did see one other thing on Fangraphs earlier that was just talking about, and so interestingly enough, actually, I just was looking it up. They're about 19th and 20th against lefties and versus righties. So from a batting average perspective, at least, it's pretty similar. But one thing they were saying is it's one of the worst fastball hitting teams in baseball. Which, I was getting in Texas basically like, hey, this is great news for the Dodgers because basically the Dodgers are the best fastball throwing team in baseball. And they're now facing like the 28th best fastball hitting team. So you wonder if, obviously May, Gonsolin, and Urias all thrive on fastballs, but
Big
maybe
fastball
May
guys,
more than the others, especially with the velocity, if that's a problem. So
well, they also just got to sort out they kind of got to do like a wellness check on those guys and just be like, all right, like, can you are you good to go? Because I think neither of those guys really had it the other night. And I might have gotten through it if he had had more, but he didn't come out pitching well, and Gonsolin didn't look as good as he did the first time through. So but you're right. Like if they're on and they can just sort of dominate with fastballs, and you can get each guy to gobble up 9 outs, you can really shorten the game.
Well, last question. I appreciate your time, then we'll get to a prediction, but just looking to the Rays, and you kind of hinted at this already, as Dodger fans, the Rays are a fairly unknown commodity, especially in 2020 when, we only saw the AL West and the NL West. So when you think of the Rays, aside from the payroll, aside from Randy Arozarena, who's just a beast, what are the things that you think of when you think about Rays baseball?
What do I think about? The best ballpark in baseball, the Trop is my number one. I love the Trop. Great place to work. They are very, this is going to sound cliche, but it's not going to sound cliche for the reason that you're thinking immediately, but they are very similar to the Oakland A's. But they're very similar to the Oakland A's, not in the payroll sense, but in the way the club is constructed, which is sort of elite defense, the ability to hit home runs with guys who are maybe flawed hitters, but who have, power. They don't have really, the only great hitter on the team this year in terms of production was Brandon Lau. Everyone else is in that kind of 85 to 120 OPS plus range, but they can slug. They're platoon heavy, and they have an elite bullpen that really misses bats. The difference between the Rays and the A's is that the Rays front end of their rotation in Blake Snell, Glasnow, and Charlie Morton, and even what's his face, Ryan Yarborough, were really good this year as compared to Montas, Minaya, Luzardo were not as good this year. But that was kind of the separator. So it's basically honestly, in terms of how they play baseball, you could drop this team in 1972 and they would fit right in. They catch the baseball, they miss bats, and they rely on timely hitting. They're not a great offensive club, but they are very, very good defensively. It's going to be really tough for the Dodgers to score. I think there's going to be a couple games where you're just wow, the Dodgers just aren't hitting tonight. Kyler Glasnow strikes out, 14 and a half dudes per 9, more than anyone in baseball. He's really good. Charlie Morton can be really good. Blake Snell's really good. Those three guys are going to be a problem. But, you're going to see the Rays do some things like their platoons. If you're a fan of the 2018 Dodgers, you'll love seeing these guys again. Eric Neander, the GM, was asked the other day, if Kevin Cash makes the lineup on his own, and Neander said something like, "We're really asking that question in 2020." And I was like, buddy, you should have been around the Dodgers in 2018. Dave Roberts got asked that fucking question every day. So yeah, they're going to have Kevin Cash is a good manager. They understand leverage. They understand, how to, sort of position your players in the field. They play great defense. So they can do a lot of different things, but it is not as good a lineup as the Braves. I can say that much.
That's, as I was listening to you, it's the Dodgers, I thought the Braves and the Padres were very similar in that even just star power, it's sort of exactly the same spots in the lineup that you saw Tatis and Machado. You're going to find Acuna and Freeman. And then you look at the Rays and it's a team that's in the bottom when it comes to a lot of these offensive stats. And yet the Dodgers haven't really faced elite pitching, starting pitching for sure. And so it will be interesting to see. So I'll get you out of here on this. I'd love to hear, as you think about this series, what's your prediction for how you think it's going to play out?
I think it'll be Dodgers in 7. I think it'll be Dodgers in 7. I think there's, the Dodgers lineup, they just disappear for, a couple days at a time. There's just going to be 2 games where you're oh, they didn't hit at all.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not, but like that's what I would.
We expect it. We're just assuming.
Yeah, I mean,
that you're right.
Their offense, like when they're rolling, you're like, why don't they score 20 runs every game?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you look up and you're like, wait, they scored 2 runs in the first and they haven't scored since. It's like, so they're good for a couple of those in this series. But I just think, 2 really good, really deep teams, and one has superstars and the other really doesn't. And I think when you add a player like Mookie Betts and you add someone who, even when he's not really hitting, can make, 3, really like game-changing, championship win probability adding catches in 3 games in a row.
Yeah.
And you have that sort of impact, like that makes the contribution, that makes like Seager going off and, Will Smith having a couple really big hits and, Cody Bellinger finally finding, his A swing. Those loom larger because they're less reliant on them, because Betts buys you more of a cushion. And so I would just think that, it's going to be close. I think the Dodgers are a slightly better team. I think in the aggregate, the 2 teams are very similar, but I think in a 7-game series, the Dodgers just have the superstars who will make enough plays and have enough big moments to do it. But like, who knows? I mean, like the Rays are really good.
Yeah.
Like the Rays can really, really pitch, and, the Dodgers pitching is a little short the first couple of days. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, that's Andy McCullough. I appreciate your time. You can check him out at The Athletic and on Twitter. Andy, we appreciate it, and good luck the rest of the season.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, that was Andy McCullough from The Athletic, and some really interesting stuff there, I thought. As he was talking, I was realizing how different this series will be for the Dodgers than the last couple have been, just as far as the makeup of the team that they're playing. And I was personally intrigued by his comments about Dave Roberts. It is interesting to think about how different would the narrative around Dave Roberts be if the World Series against the Astros didn't go the way that it went, if the Dodgers had won, if some of those decisions that Roberts still to this day is getting crushed for, maybe they weren't mistakes. Maybe guys weren't tired. Maybe guys weren't overworked. Maybe the Astros just knew what was coming. And so definitely some interesting things to think about as we go forward. But I agree with him. I thought Roberts did a really good job in Game 7, so we'll have to see how that plays out. Well, that'll do it for us today. Check out DodgerBlue.com for all the latest. Check out our YouTube, DodgerBlue1958. Please subscribe there. We've got tons of pre- and post-game content, but we've also got a full hour-long preview that myself, Daniel Starkin, and Matt Moreno all put together, so you definitely want to check that out. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, DodgerBlue1958, and